Hello and welcome. The Purdue Institute for the Study of the Iranian World welcomes you to another episode of our podcast, Legacies of Ancient Persia. Join us as we further explore the many legacies of ancient Persia and its relevance to global patrimony. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Legacies of Ancient Persia. This week's guest is Dr. Simone Oppen, a professor of classical and Near Eastern religions and cultures at the University of Minnesota. In this episode, we chat about how her high school Italian course blossomed into a passion for ancient Greece, Latin, and Greek, her current work on Persian respect for Greek sacred spaces during Xerxes' reign. We explore how this respect is depicted in ancient Greek texts and supported by comparative archaeological evidence, and the various aspects of ancient history, including Persia's handling of conquered religious sites. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you like what you hear, please give our show a 5-star rating and review us on Apple or Spotify. Great. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today on the podcast, and I also just want to say I've been pretty excited to have this conversation ever since I saw your paper at ACWorks way back in February, I believe it was. So we'll get to that for the audience, but I want to start us off and ask you how you got into classics.
Yeah, and just thanks so much for the kind invitation to be here today. And likewise, I'm excited for our conversation. I got into classics because I had the huge good fortune of having the opportunity to take Italian in my public high school in rural Northern California with an enrollment of about 200 students, just one really dedicated language teacher. And that got me interested in ancient Greece, which then snowballed into learning Latin and Greek. And the major that I had the privilege to choose as an undergrad at UC Berkeley, because I was on full financial aid and I was able to choose for myself what I was deeply intellectually passionate about without worrying so much about needing to pay back those student loans right away.
I love it. I love when opportunities come around and you're like, okay, yes, this is good. This is great. I can explore. And so what was it about classics? Was it the language angle I know for a lot of people it is. Was it the history angle? Yeah, what was it?
I think that it was primarily languages at the beginning. What made it so that I wanted to become a professional classicist or Greek and Roman studies practitioner was the opportunity as an undergraduate to direct a production of Euripides' Hippolytus in ancient Greek, which is the first such performance in over 40 years, I believe, at UC Berkeley at the time when I directed it. Here, I'm going to date myself, in 2009. And a wonderful advisor, Mark Griffith, shepherded me through that process and also provided me with the crucial space to make my own mistakes and learn from them, as well as advise the honors thesis that went alongside this performance, which was really digging deeply into a textual issue in Euripides' Hippolytus that you needed to resolve in order to stage the play. So they did go together, but they were very different approaches. And I think that performance approach, getting to witness words coming to life, springing off the page some 2,500 years later, really made me want to continue in studying the ancient world. And that led to me applying to graduate school, etc.
Nice. Oh, that's so cool. I really love hearing how people get into the ancient world, just because I think it's no secret that people who just like to study the ancient world, people who don't really get it, who don't really understand that kind of, oh, that's an interesting hobby that you kind of are not turning into a hobby anymore. Oh, I thought it was a phase. And then you're like, actually, I'm going to do it as a job. So I love the performance aspect. I love the drama aspect. I think is great. I guess I wanted to ask for the drama and the performance aspect. Was it always kind of about how the Greeks did it, or were you also interested? And because I think I saw somewhere that you have a comparative aspect to your research. So were you interested in seeing kind of and kind of comparing how ancient audiences and even modern audiences receive material based on the cultural influences that go in, whether it be just the Greeks or something else that kind of feeds into it?
Yeah, so the comparative approach in the work that I do now is something that I really came to in graduate school. I entered wanting to stage Greek tragedies and write papers on textual issues you had to resolve in order to do so. And as one does in the process of getting this amazing privilege that is getting to intellectually develop yourself, your plans change a bit. And I think that really the watershed moment for me was taking a graduate seminar with Elizabeth Irwin on Herodotus and his worlds, and really getting my eyes open to just to how much more diverse and vast the ancient Greek world could be if you took the view of Herodotus and those who critique him and also study him professionally. Um, and that led to me developing a dissertation project that had to do, yes, with Greek drama. Aeschylus's Persians does play a role. I'm still very interested in Greek drama. But Herodotus, as often with projects that involve him, really has taken over. And Herodotus led to this wonderful occasion of me getting to study some ancient Near Eastern languages in graduate school at the University of Innsbruck under the supervision of Robert Rollinger, who, as I'm sure you're well aware, is just an amazing ancient historian and a historian of the Achaemenid Empire in particular, although many other things as well. And that getting the chance to learn Akkadian as well as Sumerian with him and his colleagues was just incredible and really gave intellectual rigor to what had heretofore been my comparative interest that was solely based in Herodotus. And I could talk more about the archaeological aspect, which came subsequent to my time in Innsbruck, but I'd say that the comparative approach to studying the Greek perspective on the Persian Empire really got going through this seminar with Elizabeth Irwin, and then this amazing opportunity through the Fulbright program to study in Innsbruck under the supervision of Robert Rollinger.
Yeah, let us get into it since you opened
Mm-hmm.
the door for us because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the more I talk to scholars, the more I feel like I do notice, oh, I got into the philology and I kind of want to stay with my text. I don't want to do archaeology either, or, oh, I love the archaeology. I don't really want to do text. So I do feel like it is kind of segmented. So it's interesting that you got
Mm-hmm.
into the archaeological side. So yeah, let's get into that. Where did that come in?
Yeah, so that was something that I had in the prospectus for the dissertation, which I came up with in, again, dating myself, summer 2015, still working on the book. And that led me to study at the University of Innsbruck 2015, 2016. And then the archaeological part came in the next 2 years when I was at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens and really took advantage of their regular member program as well as the dramatically lower cost of living in Athens, and took my final year fellowship at Columbia and uh, finished my dissertation in Athens with the wonderful American School Library, as well as the ability to save up for structural unemployment and whatever else comes after one gets a PhD. So now I'm just talking about the pragmatic aspects of trying to make it as a philologist with ancient Near Eastern and archaeological interests, but the archaeological of my training really came through opportunities to get to do archaeological digs through Columbia as well as the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. It was something that was not so much on my radar during undergrad, I think primarily just because the cost of traveling abroad as an undergrad was prohibitive in addition to what field schools often charge, even if one can get scholarships. But institutions and individuals were incredibly generous to me during my graduate training. So I got to excavate twice at Hadrian's Villa in Tivoli through Columbia, and then I got to be a trench supervisor at the American School's Corinth excavations following their regular member program. So I feel like while I'm not a card-carrying archaeologist, my work definitely looks at points at which Herodotus's and Aeschylus's text can be usefully juxtaposed to our archaeological evidence, and then tries to use my literary training in this sort of maximally contextualized way to come up with something new.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really valuable. And I think I've heard from people, I think I've even mentioned to people who want to get into classics or some adjacent field. And I said, well, even if it's not like the place or the thing you really want to do, I highly recommend doing some field work in Greece, especially for the people who are really interested in cross-cultural relations with Persia
Mm,
or Egypt or something. Egypt is a different case, but especially for Persia, where Persia is concerned, since you can do field work in like certain places in Turkey but we can't go to Iran. So
mm.
it is a great way, especially if your work has any kind of crossover with Persia, to be able to see things and kind of put them into context. And so I think it's a great idea to do field work in Greece because things traveled around the ancient world. So hey, you
Absolutely.
can't go to Iran. Maybe there's some stuff in Greece that will be helpful to your work. And so I think that's really awesome that you were able to go and kind of add that on, even though that's
Yeah.
not your passion.
Yeah, I'd say really, yeah, travel throughout the modern Mediterranean world is so eye-opening in terms of the transmission of languages and goods and individuals around the world. Though it is, of course, divided in many ways today, you can really see evidence of a much more interconnected world in, say, Greece or Lebanon today, and hope for a more peaceful time when one can travel to Iran and see those amazing archaeological ruins.
Yeah, I hope sometime in my lifetime I'm able to go see Persepolis,
Yeah,
but
agreed.
we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love this. We've been adding on layers to sort of how you've added on things as you got into classics and then worked up to things. So, this is, of course, a podcast about Persia. So, I am interested to know, how did Persia start playing a role really in the stuff that you were working on? I mean, obviously, yes, Herodotus, Persians, but I'm sure there's more than just that. So, yeah, how did Persia start to kind of seep in to what you were doing?
Yeah, so I think that a hook that gets people interested in the project that I'm still working on in the form of a book manuscript is this neglected portrait of a chimerid respect for Greek sacred space that pervades Herodotus's histories, books 6, 7, and 8, but hasn't really ever been fully studied. And when it has tended to be neglected, if not outright dismissed, as an aberration from a strong pattern of sacrilege, what part of my work does is to really look in great detail and in this maximally contextualized way, but with ancient Near Eastern sources for the Achaemenid Empire primarily, at how we can understand this portrait of respect for Greek sacred space as a continuation of an earlier pattern under both the Thespids and the Achaemenids that is continued in Herodotus's histories. Interestingly enough, you don't have any evidence outside Herodotus's histories that would corroborate this pattern during the reign of Xerxes, which is primarily when Herodotus is depicting it. But you do have very strong pattern of respect for foreign religious authority, is what I'm calling it, in sources as diverse as the Cyrus cylinder to depictions of Darius on the walls of temples at the Karga Oasis. And that's the comparative evidence that I'm putting this portrait of respect for Greek sacred space in Herodotus into dialogue with. And so that's the short answer, maybe the too long answer of how Persia, in sources that aren't just Greek sources about Persia, comes into my work and what I'm trying to learn from it. Of course, 10 years ago, right, I started this adventure thinking, oh, I'll have a year learning some ancient Near Eastern languages, then I'll know enough to convincingly write a book. I'll have a year doing some archaeology. That'll take care of the archaeological element. And I should say that I am still reaping the fruit of my own youthful hubris in just trying to wrap my head around it and realizing that I will never be regarded as an expert in the fields of Achaemenid history or Greek archaeology. But nonetheless, I hope that I have some things that are interesting to say from my primarily Greek philological background.
Well, you know what? It's okay. We if everyone were an expert, and then we would either have solved every mystery ever in the past, or nobody would be an expert in anything. So I think it's great. And I think it's just a great example of, I think people are like, I've found that people are often afraid to kind of venture into fields that are not quote unquote their own or their
Hmm.
home fields because they think, oh yeah, well, I'm not gonna make a good contribution. But I think that idea is kind of backwards because I'm like, no, I think it's more helpful to have people from kind of outside the primary field of study to come in and say, hey, maybe there's this angle, maybe I can contribute something. So I
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That's encouraging. I cut you off though. You were going to say
don't
something.
know. I was just going to heap more praise on you and say it's great. So I hope that this book does very well and that people outside of the field are receiving it well as well. But with well, okay, there's two ways I can go because I'm like, wow, that dovetails so nicely into asking you about your paper at ACWorks. But I also had some other questions because I just like this idea that you're exploring. So for audience cohesion, I'm just going to dovetail it right into, I
Hmm.
believe that the subject of the book was basically the subject of your paper at ACWorks 3. I can't remember the title. That's what I was trying to find. So,
Yeah,
can you just tell the audience, yeah, what did you present at this wonderful conference that we had in New York in February of
yeah.
2025?
So the aspects of my book project that I just detailed and that I presented at ACWorks 3 is just a chapter of the book, though it definitely is consuming the entire manuscript in some ways. I could talk more about the entire book manuscript or how I was really interested in the project of ACWorks 3 and it really opened a new window on my work. What would be more interesting to you or to your audience?
I think it's all interesting. I mean, it's whatever you want to share with us, I think.
Yeah, so I could start smaller and then go bigger.
Sure.
So the project of ACWorks 3 was really working towards a literary history of the Achaemenid Empire. And that really got me into considering Herodotus's status, at least based on his hometown in Halicarnassus in Caria, as someone who was born a subject of the Achaemenid Empire, and what it might mean to write a history of empire, a literary one, from perspective of its subjects. And this is something that others, say Thomas Harrison, have really encouraged us to do. But I think it's something to take seriously in Herodotus's work. And I also think that it's important, and this is a window that I think participating in ACWorks opened on my work. It's important to consider how he's depicting others who are primarily Greeks faced with Xerxes' invasion or Darius's invasion and how they are interacting with the army, with high ups in the army to direct things as much as they can towards a more respectful pattern of behavior, particularly at sanctuaries. And this is, of course, but a part of my overall project. It is a project that, broadly speaking, looks at how our earliest Greek literary sources, so Aeschylus and Herodotus primarily, are portraying Persian interactions with Greek sanctuaries. So these can be interactions that are sacrilegious, but I'm also looking more than has ever been done before at these more respectful interactions and trying to make sense of them. Um, the remarkable thing, perhaps, that I'm finding when looking at these earlier sources is that even authors like Aeschylus, who himself fought in the Persian Wars, who had a brother who died in them, is, I would say, obviously, with our very first play that survives in literature, Aeschylus's Persians, really thinking seriously about the tragedy of the Persian people to be compelled in this way by empire. And he even, in this process, will do things like allude to a funerary epigram over a mound of Persian dead in Greece, which seems to me to be sort of an ephemeral moment of commemoration for folks that he might be regarding as the enemy, having himself fought against them and lost his brother to this conflict. And instead of just writing a really jingoistic play, he seems to be trying to understand it at a much deeper level and trying to see from the other side and see what a tragedy it is to be forced into conflict, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating because I mean, it brings up a lot of things that I haven't thought about, but also I didn't do Persia. So maybe it makes sense that I
Mm,
didn't think about it these ways. But no, I think it's really fascinating to hear you talk about it for so many reasons. But yeah, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about ACT Works is like letting people like yourself bring this kind of to greater attention because it is really important. And I think it is interesting to build a literary history of the Achaemenid Empire. So yeah, I don't, it was kind of long ago now and it feels like ages have passed. So trying to remember what's happened in February is kind of hard for me. I wish I could pull out
absolutely.
specifics of what I was thinking during the presentation, but unfortunately, I don't think I can do that at this moment. I'd have to really sit and try to think back. But for anyone listening, if you are interested in this talk, I believe some of these might eventually be released online. Maybe there's a different conference.
Oh, cool.
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember. Sometimes some may be put online, some may not. I can't remember. Hopefully, this will end up somewhere online eventually. But in the meantime, people can access your abstract at least on the Portavood website. I'm sure on the
Oh,
Collier
good.
website. I will link them in the show notes just so people can at least go read that and find other things. But yeah, so what I want to do is I want to go back and ask the question that I kind of had percolating before I asked you to just talk a little bit
Hmm.
about the ACWorks 3 presentation. And that is, it's really interesting. So this idea of Persian respect for foreign, like religious authority in religious spaces, I guess as someone who studied Greek history and not really going into the Persian side, yeah, I guess some of the sources that we read in classics are very biased. And so I'm just thinking of some of the Persian War invasions and like the Persians burned Athens to the ground at least once, but if not, I believe more several times. So kind of along with the whole burning of Athens, I'm assuming, right, that they're burning everything that which includes the Parthenon. And so that's like the most sacred space in the city of
Hmm.
Athens, at least from the stuff I remember from school, that was not
Hmm.
spared. And so how does like the burning of the Parthenon fit into this respect for other religious spaces?
Yeah. Yeah, so great question. And absolutely, my work really tries to address what I think is the reason this hasn't been fully addressed in scholarship heretofore, which is how very complicated it is to reconcile this watershed moment of sacrilege where you have Athens invaded twice, right? Once in 480 and once in 479. And during the 480 invasion, as Herodotus, our most extensive description of it, portrays, you have this moment where the sanctuary is burnt and people inside it who have sort of taken their last refuge there are not spared. And it is truly some of the worst moments of war to read that and in no way want to deny that pain and suffering in my work. I'm just trying to understand how you can have the two together. And I think people who have approached this have explained it as a politically pragmatic aspect of an ancient empire, right? So if you intend to rule the people that you conquer, you want to establish a good relationship with some of their power structures so that there can be a sort of day after tomorrow, and then you can work with those pre-existing power structures and have your rule nonetheless be the dominant one. And that is something I fully agree with from a ancient history perspective. But I find that when we get into the nitty gritty of, say, Herodotus's text, there's some really interesting narrative structuring that's going on and how he's portraying this watershed 480 BCE moment of the Persian invasion. So he has his own narrative of it, which is, of course, a polyphony of voices as well, right? You have a messenger coming who relayed that the city was being burned, et cetera, et cetera. But then what he does across book 8 is he depicts again and again this narrative that is specifically of his Athenian characters who are really voicing this very specific aspect of the narrative, mainly that the Persians burnt the sanctuary and destroyed divine statues. And in repeating this narrative, they're leaving out the other aspects of this moment, namely that suppliants were also killed, and then also that they were left behind on the Acropolis at the moment when everyone else invaded. And so I'm really trying to understand what Herodotus is doing with this contrast between initial narration and subsequent Athenian repetition of a very specific kind of victimhood and what it leaves out and what the implications are, particularly in archaeological context. There is our one surviving Persian destruction deposit that's purely Persian destruction on the Acropolis, and it is on the north wall, right behind those portions of the temples that were burnt, so the Pre-Parthenon and the Temple of Athena Polios. And it's even been argued at, I believe, the AIA meeting in 2016 by Astrid Lindenlauf, who I think is going to publish this soon in print, and we will all learn so much from it, that this is a purposeful deposit meant to represent for the future or for anyone who might somehow be seeing into this deposit what exactly was done to divine statues. This is something that I read with this sort of obsessive repetition of a very particular kind of Athenian victimhood, namely burning the city and destroying divine statues, as something that's complementary and at the same time maybe shows how archaeological evidence can be so shocking that it can lead one to elide other aspects of a narrative that also really deserve attention. So that's sort of a long-winded answer of how one can approach these really watershed moments, like the destruction of Athens in 480 and 479 BCE during Xerxes' invasion. What exactly happens when you approach in more detail and try to understand it beyond just a shocking moment of sacrilege, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you've put it this way. You've mentioned Athenian narratives, the sort of the Athenian victimhood complex that they do sort of have. And it is really interesting to think about because what it immediately gets me thinking about is, well, Athens being kind of just throughout its history, being sort of the preeminent Greek city state that we think about. I mean, yes, there's Sparta, there's some others that have their time in the sun, let's so to speak. But consistently, Athens is just kind of like the one that pops up. We hear about it. We have the most evidence. People fixate on it. So I would find it hard to imagine that the Persians didn't kind of also get this idea that, other than maybe Sparta because of the warrior aspect and that cultural sort of memory of Leonidas in the 300 at the Hot Gates, but like going in and sort of having this destruction wrought on Athens. I'm almost wondering, is it because Athens, they're famous, they're kind of like the thorn in the side that they really wanted to conquer, so that they were like, yeah, we're going to go and we're going to burn it to the ground. We're going to do all these things that not only for the political benefit Persia per se, and then feed into the Athenian victim complex. But when just thinking about the overall theme of respect for other sort of cultural customs and places. When I'm thinking of, well, let's think for a minute about some of the other places that Persia was looking to invade and conquer. There were a lot of city-states in Asia Minor. Obviously, we have the famous go to Sparta, hi, give us a symbol of earth and water. Look, you can keep governing yourselves. You can do whatever you want, basically, as long as you come and fight for us when we call on you. And this sort of idea of, okay, if you submit to us, then we will sort of leave you alone, just be your benevolent overlords, maybe ask for some tribute and some men. is in itself a kind of respect of, okay, we're not going to just bulldoze in, take over everything and
Mhm.
rule you. So this kind of rolls into this larger idea, though, of okay, so for Athens, it was, yeah, they burned it to the ground, but Athens, again, as I've kind of said, was the boogeyman, let's just call it for now. But for smaller places that weren't Athens, is there evidence of do the Persians, if they come through, right, do they respect your space if you're not like as powerful and renowned as Athens? Do they still kind of come in and maybe commit questionable things and destroy your personal space? Say I'm some just random Greek person and I have my little family shrine. Like, do they destroy that? Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's the dynamic? I mean, Athens is big. They may have to make a statement, but for the little people, do they also do that? Or is it very different? And they do actually show more respect for the smaller space?
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the things I'm still trying to work on. What I found through my method in these questions, namely Herodotus plus Greek archaeological evidence, is that this repetitive narrative that really focuses on Athenian victimhood and the specifics of that through Herodotus's Athenian characters obfuscates other local experiences of Xerxes' invasion, particularly in focus, which we hear about very briefly in Herodotus's narrative, but as evidence perhaps best at Abai, so modern Kalapodi, now decisively identified as ancient Abai, where there was also a large Apollo sanctuary, really shows that this sanctuary was burnt to the ground during Xerxes' invasion. And in addition, it seems that the people of Abai did not build again on that specific site until the Roman era, that they moved the Temple of Apollo thereafter. And one wishes that there was more of a record of what went on at Abai and elsewhere in the Greek world in terms of how exactly this experience was remembered. But all we have is brief mention in Herodotus and archaeological evidence that speaks volumes. And of course, there are other sites that have yet to be excavated that might tell us more.
Oh, the great mysteries. Yeah, because I think it's natural when you study the ancient fields based on evidence available and all these different factors. It's very hard, I feel, to really get a good answer for, oh, but what about the people like you and me, right? The normal people, not
Mm-hmm.
the high-ranking people in any of these powerful city states. So I really hope that you're able to find something that helps us really get a glimpse into that, just because, yeah, I am really interested in these ideas of, yeah, the Persians come marching through my tiny village and I have my little home shrine. What happens to it?
Yeah, I mean, as with other, I even say most things one studies in the ancient world, it sort of feels like looking through a broken mirror over your shoulder 50 foot away in the dark, lit by the moon, at somebody in a shack with a candle that they intermittently put out and then light again. And you're trying to figure out through these various perspectives what actually is going on. And it is a challenge. And we have but fragments, but they do speak volumes, I think, particularly if contextualized. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Well, seeing as you do have experience with comparative work, are you looking at any places beyond just Greece? Like out of curiosity, are you looking at like Persian sort of attitudes toward religious authority, like in Egypt or other places? Or is the focus just so, there's just like too much? So you're like, I gotta pick and focus just on this.
So, in looking at Herodotus's portrait of Persian respect for foreign religious authority, this neglected aspect of Herodotus's narrative, I definitely use evidence from Egypt, which is for earlier than Xerxes' expedition and reign. I'd say that plays a more limited role in the rest of the work, something that I'm still deciding how much of a role it's going to play in the rest of the work is looking at for statue destruction as opposed to abduction in the ancient Near East, and trying to do something with just how rare evidence for deliberate statue destruction is. It's difficult because it's not the sort of thing that one would expect a source to openly talk about unless it was from a victim perspective, and even then. But I do think I can, to some extent, talk about just how rare statue destruction is in the ancient Near East as opposed to abduction, to try to bring those gods of the people you're conquering over to your side by moving them into a better situation, at least from the conqueror's perspective.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I like the sound of that only because, and this perfectly sets me up for a great question that I wasn't anticipating being able to shoehorn in, but now I can. So it's great. So, one of the things that just in my spare, non super academic time that I'd just like to ponder is this question of sort of the urban legend of what happened to the Athena Parthenos and other famous statues. But I think she's the famous one that has made it into several urban legends. So, just for audience members, it's the nice, huge chryselephantine statue of Athena that was in the Parthenon. But there are, I mean, I study reception mainly in classics as well. So, there are sort of the more scholarly guesses of, oh, yes, she was probably melted down. They needed her for the money. And then she just kind of was destroyed. And then there's the sort of pop culture, oh, during one of the sieges of Athens, like everyone from the Romans to the Byzantines to somebody else stole her statue right out of the Parthenon in an attempt to break the Greek spirit, and because they were stealing the literal symbol of the city, and she was carted away and never seen again. There are some great urban legends and other things about it. But as someone who's kind of looking into abduction versus destruction, if you'll just allow me to go on this tangent, and if you'll want to join me on this fun tangent for just what's more fun to think about, if we're talking about a great big statue like that, is it more likely that she was just abducted rather than destroyed? Because as fun as the urban myth of destroying her to break the Greek spirit would be, I'm sure abduction was probably more practical, but also she was a ginormous 40-foot statue, so not easy to part off.
Wow, that's a good question. I honestly have not thought about this professionally until now. So thanks for encouraging me to delve deeper on this podcast. I really appreciate it, Lexi. I would say that I am somewhat agnostic as to what happened to the Athena Parthenos statue. I consider it more likely, however, that she was used in the way Pericles essentially outlined in some of his preserved speeches as a piggy bank and melted down in order to fund the Athenian war effort during the long grind that was the Peloponnesian Wars. I also find that the logistics of abducting a statue of that size would be considerable. And so, although one could imagine a small remnant being taken away, I don't think that abducting her in whole would have been possible for most armies, at least.
That is very fair. I mean, just based on the size and weight of her, I was like, I think it very unlikely that anyone's carting her
Yeah.
off to hold her prisoner in their capital to break the Greek spirit. But it does make for a great reception story of, I want to see someone write the book that's like, they stole her and she's hidden in a basement and you need to go get her and bring her back to the Acropolis to get your arete back.
I mean, could you imagine a future in which, LLMs are writing history for us and saying, well, she was abducted and brought to Tennessee, and that's why we have her in that replica of the Parthenon. The temple is a replica, but the statue is real.
She survived somewhere. Someone rescued her from this really decrepit basement in the ruins of somewhere ancient and got her there somehow. They teleported her. Yeah. See, that's the thing. History lends so well to random, cool, fun historical fiction stories. So, but on a smaller scale, because she is a very unique example. She's tall, she's huge, she's famous. But on a smaller scale, if people aren't pleased with you for whatever reason, and you have smaller, like dedicatory or just decorative statues in your home, and someone is
Mm.
displeased with you, does it make more sense to just go in and be like, I'm going to just steal your little bust of somebody over here versus let's deface it or just destroy it?
Yeah, I mean, I think not a good idea. The historical record gives us plenty of opportunities to study these sorts of actions and why they come about.
I think it's just a really fascinating thing to think about. And so I look forward to when the book eventually drops and
Oh,
subsequent
thank
work.
you.
So that way I
Yeah,
can
me
try to
too.
get some more answers to these questions that are now percolating. And this is great because I always like to live in the realm of what ifs. So this conversation is single-handedly going to make me think about the Athena Parthenos for the rest of the day in these fantastical ways of how many ways can she have been stolen out of Athens, and how do we craft a heroic narrative to get her back?
Yeah. There's some really good work out there on statues that were allegedly brought back from Persia by Alexander, which show up, of course, in Alexander histories. And folks who know a lot more about this than I, say like Sabina Mueller, say this is completely made up. It's
Well,
intended to burnish the reputation of Alexander. But there are examples on the material side, say the Persepolis Penelope, which would seem to speak quite sharply against that.
I was gonna say, wasn't there some story legend? Again, I'm so bad. I'm fuzzy with the Persian side, but wasn't there something about during Alexander of Macedon's conquest when he finally rolls into Persepolis and he's trying to figure out when to pursue Darius or something? I feel like I've heard of there's some legend or story where he's looking at some of these fallen statues that were abandoned in haste or something, and then he kind of either pops one up because it's fallen over and it's broken,
Hmm.
and then there's some significance to him sort of respectfully putting it back up and then
Hmm.
not destroying it to go back and find that. But
Yeah, this sounds like it might be somewhere in Arian. I don't know as well as I should, though I have to say he goes well beyond the bounds of the current book project. But still, I hope to read more Arian in my future.
okay, well, that's, you know what, that the fact that you can even try to pinpoint an author who may have written about this is better than what I'm currently able to produce. Again, I really have to go back. I have to find where I saw that reference and then see if I can find it, because it was really interesting though when I came across it and I went, look at the care that he took in picking up
Hmm.
this fallen statue when you're
Hmm.
in the Persian capital, and he's just cool with it. So, yeah, I have to find that source. Yeah, really got to find that. Anyway, there's so much more I could say about this because it's so interesting and there's so much to get into just in these topics alone. But, again, there's a whole book that is being produced on this. So I
And
don't,
I'm not even sure my book touches on all of this, honestly. But hopefully someone else is taking it up and writing something because it deserves to be tackled.
it definitely does. And I hope the audience agrees with that. So instead of just kind of trying to find more interesting ways to extrapolate on an already packed topic, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to pivot us because there are two questions that I kind of ask every single person who comes on this show.
Okay.
Interested in learning more about the wonders of ancient Persia? Visit the UCLA Archaeological Gazetteer of Iran. The Gazetteer digitally preserves famous locations, World Heritage sites, and lesser known areas from all time periods of ancient Iranian history. You can explore using the interactive map or visit the encyclopedic catalog for updates to the ever-growing list of archaeological sites. Visit www.irangazetteer.ucla.edu and learn more about what the Archaeological Gazetteer of Iran has to offer.
The first one is, what, in your opinion, is the greatest legacy left to us from ancient Persia? And there is no right or wrong answer here.
I have to admit that my knee-jerk response is the trilingual inscriptions that we have at Behistun, that we have local copies of at Babylon and in Egypt, in several media. And it is just dazzling to think of the organization required to distribute and adapt for local audiences, say, switching the god from Ahura Mazda to Bel for your Babylonian audience in multiple languages throughout an empire. Like, it just is incredible to think of that level of sophistication, as much as empire absolutely has its downsides too, to think about that multilinguality and that administrative capacity and the just vast space it covered in a pre-modern era is just, to me, amazing.
Yeah, well, we love knee-jerk responses because, again, it's intentionally supposed to be such a broad question that I am trying to stump people in the best way possible because I wanted to feel like, oh, but I could choose this or this. How can I choose one? Because we all know the answer is like all of them. So the second question that I'm going to ask you is, what, in your opinion, would be the best legacy that we as scholars now can leave for future students of Iranian studies or classics or anyone who wants to do adjacent work?
I suppose that in scholarship, it's possible to explore and hold together a much broader world than modern political divides might allow one to. This, of course, is a answer that comes from my own situation as an American citizen studying ancient Greece and ancient Persia. But I think for me, that is definitely a legacy that excites me today.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, promise. This is actually the final question, but it's really easy. And that is, where can people find you if they want to email you, ask you a question, check out some of your
Oh,
publications, all that good stuff?
yeah. So I have the distinct privilege and good fortune of being employed at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities in Minneapolis, where I'm an assistant professor. And I have a web page that has my email, my office phone. I don't check as often, but it now routes to Zoom. And so I get emails if you call me on my office phone. And I'm always open to hearing from folks who want to share their knowledge of the ancient world with me or just talk about it. And I've got a plug that we still have an awesome grad program over here in Minneapolis that is fully funded at both the master's and the PhD level. It has a master's in classics as well as in Eastern, classical and Near Eastern religions and cultures. And at the PhD level, it is classical and Near Eastern religions and cultures. We no longer have a classics PhD. But if you want to continue these conversations in the deepest possible way through going to humanities grad school, but without going into debt, we can do so in Minneapolis. And perhaps that was too much of an answer from my sleep-deprived brain, but there you go.
No, I think that's great. We should always be plugging programs that will allow people to study different aspects of antiquity, whether you get in through classics, because that just seems to be the easiest way, since there are just sadly not a lot of straight up Iranian studies programs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
PLA, we're very lucky to have one, but
Absolutely.
that is definitely not the case. So I would say, yeah, always plug and tell people where they can get into sort of any kind of classics or ancient Near Eastern studies places, because you can always move into closer to where you want to be. You just got to get your
Yeah.
foot in the door. So, with that, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, for being willing to sort of just kick around these wild ideas that my brain somehow thinks up, and for talking to us about the work that you're doing, the book that hopefully will be published in the next couple years. And you've given people, I think, hopefully lots to chew on of where they could potentially pick up some strands where you're not going to be focusing on too much. And so that way they can extrapolate.
Yeah, thanks so much for your kind words and for this invitation, Lexi. I've really enjoyed our time together and our conversation, and it's also encouraging for the ongoing work of the book.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I'll maybe in a few years when it's out, I'll kind of sneak into the show notes and I'll drop a link when it's ready. So that way,
Yeah, I'd love that.
perfect. Legacies of Ancient Persia is a Portavood podcast production, hosted and edited by Lexi Henning, with select episodes co-hosted by Marissa Stevens. Cover art provided by Hadley Leesman and original music by Brent Arhart. Established in 2017 as the premier research center for the study of ancient Iran, the mission of the Portavood Institute for the Study of the Iranian World is to engage in transformative research on all aspects of Iranian antiquity, including its reception in the medieval and modern periods, by expanding on the traditional domains of old Iranian studies and promoting cross-cultural and interdisciplinary scholarship. Thanks for listening to our show. It's available to stream on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Portavood Institute and at Portavood UCLA, or visit our website, portavood.ucla.edu. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and review us. For podcast inquiries or questions about the Portavood Institute, please email us at portavoodpodcastproduction@gmail.com. We'll see you next time as we continue our deep dive into the legacies of ancient Persia.